Welcome to DNF. I'm Jessica Smetana. We have a special guest co-host this weekend to talk about this incredible Austrian Grand Prix because Spencer Hall is in Mongolia, and I don't know why, but that's okay. We'll find out in a couple weeks when he's back. But for now, Meg Schuster is here. She's the host of the Ringer F1 show, which is a great show. They do amazing race recaps on it. Highly recommend it. And she's an editor at The Ringer. So Meg, welcome to DNF. I thought this was going to be like, kind of like Spain, where it's a little boring, kind of more of the same, and then bam, 20 laps to go and shit hits the fan. What are your thoughts now? It's been a couple days since the race ended on this crazy finish in Austria.
Hi, first of all, thank you for having me. Second of all, I feel like I'm still catching my breath from all of this. I was fully with you for the first 50 some odd laps. I thought this was going to be, your typical, some two-stop intrigue, like some back of the pack fighting, and then Max and Lando take 1 and 2 pretty decisively. And then all of a sudden we get an uncharacteristically long Red Bull pit stop. We get a Max lockup, and we get this sort of epic back and forth fight, which I actually think the quotes afterwards have, lasted longer in my memory than even the fight itself.
Yeah, so let's start with that because I think enough dust has settled now that the initial, I think fair to say, aggressive defending by Max Verstappen, not saying like unfair, we can debate that later, but aggressive defending by Max Verstappen, the shock has worn off a little bit. And now we are left with a potential ruined friendship, a potential like moment that changes the rest of the course of this F1 season, questions about the rules and the enforcement of the rules, and is Max, is he a bad person? Is he a good person? Is he just a race car driver? Oh my God, so many things to discuss. So I guess we should start with Lando Norris and his quotes after the race.
Lando, just sum up how you're feeling right now for me if you can.
I don't know, what is that? Disappointed, nothing more than that, honestly. Just was a good race. I look forward to, just a fair battle, a strong, fair battle. But I wouldn't say that's what it was in the end. So, tough one to take. It was a mistake-free race from my side, and I feel like I did a good job. But for taking out the race, so nothing more than that.
Just finally, for me, we spoke before the race, and I asked you about your relationship with him, your friendship with him, now that you're his closest rival. And you said you have respect in the car, both of you, and then outside of that, you can go for dinners or play paddle or whatever. Do you still feel the same way now? Will you speak to him?
I don't know. It depends what he says. If he says he did nothing wrong, then I lose a lot of respect for that. If he admits to being a bit stupid and running into me and just being a bit reckless in a way, then I'd have a small amount of respect for it, but it's still a tough one to take, when we're fighting for the win, and I'm trying to be fair from my side, and he just wasn't, so I don't know, that's not what I'm thinking about. I don't care about that now. I just got it for the team.
To me, Meg, it seems like this friendship may be damaged beyond repair. He said that he will lose all respect for Verstappen if he doesn't admit some guilt. And we know that that is just not something that will ever happen.
No, Max was pretty decisive in all of his post-race comments. He, sort of blamed it on the team, actually, and did some finger pointing as to like, well, we should have never been in that position anyway, but also like, I'm always going to race hard. I'm never going to race to be in second place. This, it's just not who I am, and I did nothing wrong here. And I would say the friendship is certainly threatened, if not ended. First of all, I can't believe that we're at a place where we're asking professional athletes about the state of their friendship after like an on-track battle. It's so amazing. I feel like we're back in grade school here, and threatening people on the playground that like, you're not coming to my birthday party if you don't apologize for this. And it's amazing. I can't believe that we're going to get to see them race again this coming weekend in Silverstone too, with no week or 2 weeks in between to let things settle. I'm really, really excited to see how this plays out this coming week too. But yeah, I mean, Lando, I think, is going to be sorely disappointed in how Max handles this. And I don't know if Max is bothered by it at all.
That is a good point that you bring up about this being the second part of a triple header. Do you feel like this sort of racing incident happens if this isn't something that's kind of simmering and then bubbles up over the span of a weekend with a sprint race that had sort of like similar storylines throughout it, and a season in which I think for the last 2 weeks there's been a lot of questions about whether the McLaren is actually a better car than the Red Bull right now, and that Max is losing the sort of tremendous advantage he had in the last 2 seasons in his car, just being so much faster than everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the first time that we've seen Red Bull be consistently threatened, I think, since early 2022, back in the good old days when it seemed like Ferrari was going to be a consistent competitor. RIP Charles Leclerc and those title chances. I'm still bitter about it. And this weekend, oh my God. But yeah, I mean, you have to feel like Max and Red Bull overall are starting to sort of feel this pressure. We're at a place where we're talking about and questioning whether Red Bull is the fastest car on track anymore. I still believe that until someone is able to beat them consistently, that it's hard for me to say anyone is faster. You know, in the sprint race Max won, he got P1 in both qualifying sessions. He was in the lead for most of this race, but you know, you see Lando coming up as quickly as he was behind him, and it's hard not to say that McLaren is surging right now and is finding a lot of answers. And Red Bull, you know, with Adrian Newey leaving and their tech department sort of in an overhaul, I'm really curious to see what they are able to haul out the rest of the season.
The McLaren is better going longer on stints with better tire degradation. The Red Bull has struggled with certain circuits that the McLaren is better on, and the curbs, and we've talked about all of this on the show before, so we won't get into too much detail, but I think you're right. I think that like Max is feeling the pressure a little bit. He knows he still has a humongous lead, and his lead got bigger this weekend because of the 10-second penalty that really didn't penalize him at all, which is another thing we need to talk about. And I think that you saw him being a little is desperate the right word? Being a little desperate to maintain that position because he felt a real threat behind him. So what would you classify this Verstappen move as? Is this just a blatant breaking of the rules? Is this him just using the rules to his advantage, knowing that he will not, because he has not been penalized for this really in the past? Is this just like a race car driver trying to race his car? Like, where do we put this?
Yeah, I've seen and heard a lot of people compare this to 2021 with him, and this seems fairly apt to me. That was the last time we saw him in a full sort of wheel-to-wheel battle with somebody else consistently. Obviously, that time it was Lewis Hamilton. Max is in a unique position where he is doing something that, you know, we heard Lando on the radio a lot on Sunday complaining that Max is moving under braking and this is so dangerous. And it sounded like he wanted to, you know, harangue him in a court of law over this, which I think is a little bit extreme. But Max has certainly found something of a gray area in the rules where, you know, according to him, he's moving before he's actually hitting the brakes. So to him, that's not moving under braking. And he hasn't really been penalized specifically for that to this point. So, you know, in his case, like, why would you change and do anything differently when you're gaining a competitive advantage over this and the FIA isn't doing anything to stop it? Somewhat interestingly, I have seen, you know, most people piling onto Max, but one of his defenders this week has been Toto Wolff, which is fascinating considering that the last time this was happening was in 2021 against him and his team. So, you know, we can parse about why Toto is maybe doing that and trying to lure him over to Mercedes, but I don't think there's any incentive for Max to change at this point because he's doing well and he's gaining an advantage, and why would you switch that up at this point?
Yeah, so there was the initial move, which Lando said was him moving after braking to defend and reacting to Lando's move. And then there was, after they already made contact, he kind of pushed Lando into the grass a little bit. And so that seemed to not be on the steward's radar at all because he was penalized the 10 seconds, ended up keeping P5. And in the meantime, Lando, of course, had to retire his car, got no points, even though it looked like with 20 laps to go, he might end up with points for first place, which would have been pretty big in trying to close that gap at least a little bit.
Yeah.
So Max ended up with points. Lando ended up with no points. I think that your point about Toto Wolff is interesting because a lot of team principals had some very strong words, including the McLaren team principal.
Yes.
We will listen to his quote now because he also reference the 2021 season and sort of put this on F1 and the FIA for not clamping down on Max's driving style.
The stewards have found that Max was responsible for the incident. Max has just called it, I don't know if you heard it on the radio, ridiculous, and Red Bull agree. They said that Lando was in part to blame. Obviously, how do you see it?
Yeah, I see that the entire population in the world would know who is responsible except for a group of people. But the problem behind it is that if you don't address these things honestly, they would come back. They have come back today because they were not addressed properly in the past when there was some fights with Lewis that needed to be punished in a harsher way. Like this, you learn how to race in a certain way, which we can consider fair and square.
You're talking about Brazil 2021 here.
Yes, I mean, there's many episodes. Yeah. The fact is that we have so much respect for Red Bull, so much respect for Max. They don't need to do this. They don't need to do this. It's a way to almost compromise your reputation. Why would you do that?
So yeah, I think really interesting things have come out of this race. And of course, as a newer F1 fan, I'm desperate to find out what happens with the Max and Lando friendship now. I'm very intrigued to see how Drive to Survive covers this. I have a feeling that they're gonna like open this episode with like a slow motion dramatic video of them playing paddle, and it's going to be really heartbreaking and devastating to see this betrayal for Max Verstappen over his bestie. But I don't know. Do you think the two will be able to patch things up?
I would think so. A lot of the quotes I'm sure were given in the heat of the moment, and especially Lando's respect quote was just iconic. Like, if he doesn't own up and admit this, I will lose all respect I have for him. Whatever. We see F1 drivers do this a lot, where they give these like incredible quotes in the heat of the moment, and then you ask them about it 2 weeks later, and they're like, "Oh, like I don't even really remember saying that. Like it's fine." I feel like these are all very dramatic individuals when it comes to trying to win races, and they're all sort of doing like a little presidential campaigning afterwards to try and say that they were in the right whenever a situation like this comes up. So they're going to give their strong quotes. I would be surprised if, by interviews on Thursday, if they were still dwelling on this, but you never know. If either of them decides to take this more personally than the other, then maybe the days of sim racing together and playing paddle together will be left in the dust. It would be really tragic.
Yeah, so tragic. I'm curious if you have ever betrayed a friend in this way and had this sort of like friendship betrayal, and did you patch things up? Did things work out for you in the end?
I would say, in my younger days, occasionally you would have bouts of being extremely competitive. There were definitely days, playing Wii tennis with friends where I would figure out how to do the spin serve and they didn't understand how to do it. And it was my own little version of a competitive advantage, and they would get pretty salty about it afterwards. But I wouldn't say it was anything that impacted us long term. It was more of again, in the heat of battle kind of a thing, if you consider Wii tennis to be battle. But
yeah, Wii tennis is battle. That's actually a great call. I was trying to think like myself if there was anything like this that's ever happened with me and my friends, but certainly playing Monopoly Deal or like Scrabble. We also we play Trivial Pursuit a lot, and one of our friends, he's French, and every time someone reads a trivia question that he thinks is easy, that the other person like being asked the question doesn't know, he'll just kind of like quietly say under his breath, "Easy." And it like pisses us off so much, and we want to kill him every single time, but we still play for some reason. And this is how I feel like this Verstappen Lando thing is just like getting under his skin and really, really irritating him. But you're right. Maybe they'll be able to patch things up, or maybe this will be something that we'll get to watch kind of fester and become like in 2021. It was like a slow build until the most dramatic final race of any F1 season. Maybe we'll get a little bit of that, although I still anticipate Max to be like 300 points ahead by that final race because his lead is already so high. But yeah, I don't know. Any more thoughts on Lando and Max?
I would hate to see friendship die, but I will say I always root for chaos in Formula One. So if this sort of continues and we keep getting some spicy on-track and off-track stuff, I'll be happy either way. It'll be tough to stomach, but it'll be fine.
I also this is like one of the rare instances where I haven't really seen too many people defending Verstappen. I think Toto Wolff might be in his own team. They might be the only ones, and I find that really interesting too.
Yeah, Christian Horner gave, sort of doubled and tripled down on all of this week. Shockingly, I'm sure we're all surprised by that fact. I saw a clip from him on Sky Sports today where he said, Lando better keep expecting this. Max is only going to continue to get his elbows out there and all of that. Max actually, I think, kind of backtracked on some of his quotes a little bit later once he'd rewatched, seen the replay and all of that and said, it's more unfortunate than anything else. And he was still definitely not apologizing, but was a little less strong-arming about it. But it seems like Red Bull is, has dug their heels in on this and think that they're in the right, which no one in the F1 world is shocked by.
No one is surprised. But yeah, speaking of damaged relationships, I think, even if there wasn't stuff going on below the surface with Max and the Verstappens and Christian Horner, not surprising to have him go out there and go to bat for Max. What can you tell us about this weird other interpersonal dynamic going on this past weekend with Max's dad and Christian Horner?
I'm truly so glad you asked. This is my favorite F1 drama at the moment. So Jos Verstappen, Max's dad, was due to drive in I think it's a Legends parade at the Red Bull Ring on Sunday. So this is, a pretty low stakes development where he was just supposed to kind of trundle around the track and get his kudos and get filmed
is a great
being
word.
there. And just, be able to tell everyone, I got to drive on the Red Bull Ring this weekend. But then he told a Dutch newspaper that he decided to step down from driving because he heard that Christian was either like trying to fully block his entry into this parade or prevent him from being filmed during the event, which both things are just so absurd that I would love to believe both were the case.
Yeah.
Christian said that, this is like outside of my purview. I have no control or desire to have control over this. So this is silly. The whole thing is wildly silly.
It is absurd. So yes. So the Verstappens, and then Max had to basically come in and be like, everything's good, nothing to see here, don't worry about it. I always appreciate when two very upstanding gentlemen get into a gentleman off over Instagram posts, because that is really what this came down to.
Yeah, two giants of F1, if you will. It was just like the timing of it was so funny because that's the question. So it was just, the timing was incredible because Max on Thursday had been asked over and over again, like, will you be with Red Bull in 2025? And he finally came out and said, yes, I will be with Red Bull. Like, everyone should calm down. This is going to happen. We're planning the car structure and all of this. We're in development talks. It's all fine. And then this all happens over the course of Friday into Saturday. And so then Max has to sort of get asked about it again. And he sides with his dad on this, which is interesting and I think very, very notable. At the end, he said everything about this scenario just could have been avoided, which I also agree with. Like,
very
who
true.
out there outside of Jos Verstappen would have cared if he was driving in a Legends parade like Sunday morning? I don't think anyone would have even noted that, but it has sort of redeveloped all of these. Is Max happy rumors? Would he ever leave to go to Mercedes? Then you get Toto Wolff chiming in his weird Max defense. And he's been, all over social media and regular media talking about how much he would love to have Max with the team next year. So seems to have reflared all of this. And I'm here for all of it.
It's super interesting. I think that Max's comments are definitely what he would say regardless of if he were coming back or not, because he's not going to give any sort of hint either way. And it's kind of like a believe it when you see it thing for next year with him. And the fact that Carlos Sainz is still just kind of out there not signing anything, even though there's been all these hints that like, there's an announcement this weekend, something's happening this weekend, and then the weekend goes by and nothing happens. That kind of makes me intrigued. Although I tend to believe Max Verstappen will be back at Red Bull. And I don't think they would have re-signed Sergio Perez if that were not the case. But it's F1. And I didn't think Lewis Hamilton was going to go to Ferrari next year. So I guess nothing would surprise me.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I thought the Checo move was sort of confirmation that Max was coming back. But then again, I also kind of feel like Carlos would have signed somewhere if the Red Bull seat was fully locked in. I feel like he's just still holding out hope that one of these, important and good teams is going to call him up and say, hey, we actually have some drama. Would you like to sign with us? But with that situation too, I found it really interesting that both Williams and Audi/Sauber seem to be getting kind of pissed off about all of this. And now it seems like Williams are maybe looking at Valtteri Bottas or Esteban Ocon and are maybe sick of waiting around and being second fiddle to all of this. So I don't know if Carlos is playing himself out of position here, but it's really been interesting to follow.
For sure. I mean, I think he's in a very high risk, high reward situation, which is like an F1 driver's bread and butter. That is kind of like, if you're good at it, then you're putting yourself in those positions a lot and coming out with the reward. And I guess we'll see how well he's able to maneuver all of it. Okay, we need to talk about the real winner this weekend because it got totally overshadowed by all of the Lando and Max racing stuff. But George Russell won the Austrian Grand Prix and went across the finish line and said, yabba dabba doo.
Oh my God.
What a moment for him. I mean, how surprised were you to see him at the top of the podium when all is said and done?
I was surprised. I have a firm belief that the less we hear from George Russell over the course of a race weekend, the better he's going to do. It's when he gets onto the radio and complains and tries to dictate his own strategy that I start to have real concerns about how the race is going to go. I texted Spanners Ready, who I host the Ringer F1 show with this week, and I said, if all races were sprint races, I think George would be an incredible F1 driver because there's no tire management or real strategy. You just get to kind of go out there and grip it and rip it. But yeah, he was like very quietly competent. He seemed to just go about his thing and do his thing. And I thought it was amazingly funny when Toto jumped on the radio while George was in like the most difficult corner of the track and said, George, I think you can win this. And it was like, can we have a little bit of awareness from you, Toto, and not distracting your driver when he's in the middle of trying to do this? But shout out to George. He was fully in the right place at the right time.
Yabba dabba do. I thought that Toto getting on the radio to tell him like you can win this when he knows he's in first place. It reminds me of when I'm playing golf and my dad is like trying to give me pointers on my backswing and I'm like trying to take a deep breath like, okay, like I know I'm gonna keep my head down.
I understand. I know. You've told me this 100 times.
Yeah.
We get it. We
not
know.
Helping at this point. I'm either going to crush this or I won't. Chances are I won't.
Yep.
I'm very bad. But I think, okay, my question on George, I think you're right about him kind of being best when he's not leading the pack and is kind of having his own like quiet race, I guess. Did it help him? And do you think ultimately was the reason that he won to have Lewis kind of be a non-factor in the race later on as he was kind of hanging in there for third before all this shit happened?
Yeah, I think it helped. I feel like George gets most in his head when he is going up against Lewis, which makes sense because, in Formula One, the person that you always feel like you have to beat is your teammate, and Lewis is this, legend in Formula One, and George has been going up against him now for a few years. So I think that has to help. I also think that Mercedes did a nice job in sort of putting them on different strategies in the middle of the race. So Lewis went on, I forget which one of them did medium, hard, medium in terms of tires and which did medium, medium, hard, but it sort of put them on different paths. And so it, kind of kept them out of the collision zone, if you will, or kept them away from each other, which I think Alpine could learn a little bit from the Mercedes strategists and all of this. But I think that was a smart job by Mercedes, and I think it allowed George a little bit of freedom to focus on the rest of the race and not just what is Lewis doing? Do I have the advantage over Lewis? Can I pass Lewis? Will he let me by? All of these things that seem to sort of fester in his head over the course of any given race weekend.
Yeah. Okay. Well, changing gears for a second then to talk. That was a good car joke. To talk about the Alpines.
Oh gosh.
They're still a mess, and there's really no recourse for any sort of like misbehavior now that Gasly's coming back and Ocon is out. So, I guess like, is it too late in the season for there to be any sort of turnaround for them, or is this kind of just what we're going to get for every single weekend until the season's over and Ocon leaves?
Well, they just got passed by Haas in the constructors standings, which not to dig on Haas, but doesn't really seem to be a place that you want to be in F1 terms. Shout out to Haas, by the way. They're crushing it this year. But
Yeah.
I really don't know what they do in terms of discipline, except, they're starting to give other drivers like FP1 drives. Like I think Jack Doohan is doing FP1 this weekend in place of Pierre Gasly. I probably said his last name wrong.
No, I think you said it right.
Okay, good.
I actually, weirdly enough, I met him at the Miami race. Some man,
cool.
So there was like a traffic jam because Donald Trump was walking into the McLaren,
Of course, yeah,
the McLaren garage, and I was like trying to go to the bathroom or something, and I just ended up like stuck in a line of people for 20 minutes, and some random man came up to me and was like, "He's an F1 driver," and I was like, okay, and then we awkwardly met. He was really nice though, but
that's good.
Super
good
nice
for Jack.
Super nice guy. Yeah, maybe we'll be on the grid next year. But what a random word salad, like Mad Libs quote of like.
I love it.
F1 driver. Well, Secret Service was like pushing people out of the way for Donald Trump to go talk to Zach Brown. Very
unbelievable
Miami things. Yeah, weird.
Very Miami thing. Yeah. So I don't know if they, if Alpine decides to like ramp that up from, you get an FP1 drive to, if this persists, maybe I take a Grand Prix drive away from one of these people and toss you in. I don't really know why you wouldn't try something like that at this point if you're Bruno Famine, because it doesn't seem like these guys are really taking any of your let's all get along kumbaya messaging to heart at this point.
Yeah.
So
if anything, it's going to get worse because the
Yeah.
stakes they're like not really stakes for if you go against what the team says, right?
Right. There was this incredible Ted Kravitz quote this weekend at one point where he said something like, what's Bruno Famine gonna do? Like sack Esteban Ocon again? And I was like, yeah, like your ultimate punishment is gone. He already knows that you're not bringing him back this year. So I don't know what supersedes that this season, but Esteban Ocon is also racing for a drive. So of course he's going to want to beat Pierre Gasly and try to prove to these other teams that like I have a lot left in the tank. I would be a valuable asset, but you would think he would try to do that while also being a good teammate, because I don't know what team is going to try to bring that energy into their garage for next year.
Yeah, that's fair. Haas is having a decent season, and I don't know enough about their like car setup to know if this is just a result of having a new guy in charge who is maybe just like a breath of fresh air for the team, or having two actual like pretty good drivers that are now competing. You don't have a driver that is significantly worse than the other, although you have one that maybe is like a little bit of a wild card sometimes. And like there was I think it was during qualifying this weekend, or maybe it was during the race, Kevin Magnussen just telling his engineer like fuck that or something to like trying to not overtake his teammate at one point. But so there's definitely still some drama there, but I don't know what to attribute their come up to, or is it just a matter of like the Alpine is so bad that someone has to be there, right? Like there's got to be a hierarchy of the bottom teams, and Haas just came out on top. But they are getting like points, like they're actually finishing races well.
They are. They've been in the top 10, fairly often this season. And I don't know totally what to attribute it to either. Maybe it's something to do with the Patrick Ewing effect of not having Gunther Steiner around anymore. I don't know. That hurts my heart to say as someone who's a massive fan of Gunther Steiner. But it's been like weirdly kind of quiet competence from Haas outside of, all the Kevin Magnussen penalty stuff, which I keep holding my breath every weekend to see if he's going to hit that 12 penalty points mark and get a suspension. But they've just been going about their business. The cars have been quicker than I expected. I think before the season, hand up, I think I picked them to finish last. So I have never been happier to be wrong and see them doing well. I only want good things for them. But I'm really sort of curious if this is sort of a long-standing development thing, or if they're just managing to get absolutely everything they can out of that car.
Yeah, for sure. They're in the points often enough that I'm not like, oh my God, look, a Haas. Right. Like every time it happens, or every time one of them's in like Q3. Okay. I'm still trying to decide what the best part of the weekend was. Whether it was Yabba Dabba Doo, whether it was Lando's dramatic quotes after the race, or if it was the Hans Zimmer national anthem.
Oh my God.
Because wow, what a freaking moment. Did you get to watch it live, first of all? And how many times have you rewatched it since the race ended? Because for me, it's like on a loop right now on my YouTube.
I did watch it live, and I have definitely watched it since because my jaw dropped so far and I was in such a state of shock that I don't think I really internalized it the first time around. I was just sitting there like, you know, they had however many electric guitars out there, and then they have the people singing, and it's just sort of this like incredible like orchestral / rock / who even knows thing. Can we have him do every anthem going forward? Is that something that F1 can commission for me? Because I would be incredibly into this. It was hands down the best anthem of the year. I don't think we'll have another contender for it. Shout out to Austria, I guess, for allowing him to do this.
Apparently, so he is doing the score for the Brad Pitt, Lewis Hamilton F1 movie, which is apparently why he was doing like F1 press this weekend, I guess. Amazing. Or why he was involved in this, which I didn't know. And now I'm like, what is this movie? Is this going to be like a really like dramatic Nolan-esque like psycho thriller F1 movie? Like I kind of just thought it would be your typical sports movie, and now I'm like, Hans Zimmer, that's an interesting level to this. I'm not sure what to expect, but yeah, he was on the grid when Martin Brundle was doing his grid walk, and Martin Brundle like bumped into him and was like, hello, like, Hans, are you excited? Well, like, you're doing the anthem for us. And he was like, I'm about to butcher Mozart or something like that. And it was so funny. And I actually looked it up. According to Wikipedia, Mozart is credited with composing the Austrian national anthem, but there is a dispute over whether it was actually him or not. So if you know anything about that, or if you have any details, please tweet at me, because I would love to get to the bottom of this. I didn't know there was a anthem like composing dispute things happening.
Yeah. That's a pretty iconic dispute. I also would love any details, so feel free to tag both of us. That would be really special. But yeah, like, just a real heater of a weekend for Hans Zimmer. We get, like you said, the news that he is doing that score. He does the anthem. He also got up on the podium, which had to be great fun for him up
with
there.
Pascal Siakam. It was such a strange combination of people handing out the awards.
Yes, incredibly bizarre. But yeah, I mean, what a day for Hans Zimmer. It has to be up there for him in terms of all-time great days.
Okay, so we talked about all of our favorite things from this past weekend. We are one race away from another like little mini break on the schedule. We have Silverstone upcoming this weekend. Oh, before we move on, also highlight of the weekend is always when Bernie Collins is on Sky. She is so good and breaks down the tire stuff like so well, and I just love hearing her talk basically, and her accent is also great. So shout out to her, she rules. But going forward into Silverstone and the rest of the season, what are our kind of like big picture thoughts after this weekend? Do we anticipate more of these Red Bull McLaren battles? Do we think that McLaren will start winning their share of these? Do we still think the Red Bull is fastest? Do we still think Max is the best driver and the fastest car? Like, where are we at right now?
Yeah, it's going to be really, really fascinating. And I feel like it's going to come down a bit to car development. Obviously, McLaren's been putting a lot of developments into their car ever since I think they did kind of their big upgrade package ahead of Miami, which is where we saw Lando win, of course. And they've been really in the mix at the front of the grid ever since. I'm curious how Red Bull is able to respond to that. I've heard that, some drivers and some people around paddocks believe that just having Max Verstappen in your car can earn you upwards or up to like 0.2 of a second per lap, which seems incredible to me. But, just seeing the way that he's able to consistently beat Sergio Perez and put such a great distance between all these other drivers, I would sort of buy into that and believe that. So I think it's going to be a great test to see what the lengths that Max is able to get out of that car and, sort of the depths that McLaren is willing to go to get more race wins and be up there consistently. This is sort of a little bit reminiscent of the 2021 battle where we got Max, who's the up-and-comer, fighting against Lewis, who's this, long-standing incumbent. Obviously, Lewis had been winning for a lot longer than Max has. But I'm curious which side we see more desperation from. We saw a little bit of that from Lando this weekend when he was trying to overtake Max. He did a lot of sort of weird dive bombing down the inside of corners and just trying to force Max to kind of react to him, which I'm hoping we see a little bit more nuanced racing out of Lando maybe going forward. But, then we saw Max sort of take Lando out at the end. So that seemed a little desperate too. So I don't know which side is going to take the edge there in terms of wheel-to-wheel racing. And I can't wait to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, I think the biggest indictment of Verstappen's driving that you could make out of this weekend is that dude, you don't have to do this to win the Austrian Grand Prix. You are still in the lead by a mile if you come in second to Lando Norris. Mm-hmm. His defense of that obviously is okay, well then maybe I'll just stay home. What's the point if I don't want to actually try to win a race? And I understand that, and that mentality is not one that I have, so I can't put myself in his little racing sneaker things, mm-hmm. Which are always so fun to watch them walk around and they just look so silly. But yes. I'm with you. I think that there maybe is something to said for the overall strategy of the season coming into play at some point, and someone being able to rein him in and tell him you don't need to lay it all out for this corner. There's a bigger mm-hmm. thing going on here than just winning this one race. Although it's the Red Bull Ring, you want to win in Austria. I get it. It's a home team race, or however you say that. Okay, last kind of big picture question before we mm-hmm. finish this pod, which has been great, by the way. Love this. Spencer, stay in Mongolia. Just kidding. There was a lot of I guess fan frustration, media frustration over the FIA and the stewards. Once again, whether it was the track limits and Oscar Piastri's time being deleted in qualifying, or Lewis's penalty for going over the white line coming out of the pit lane, or Verstappen's penalty, there's just always a sort of existential question over whether Formula One can govern the sport in a mm-hmm. consistent and fair way. Where are you on your thoughts about this just generally? Where would you like to see changes made? What kind of frustrated you the most? And is this ever something that will change in Formula One?
Yeah, it's really hard because there are instances where I would like to see the FIA have a bit more of a backbone. When you talk about sort of the Max, quote unquote, moving under braking, whether he's actually doing that or not doing that, who's to say? And it feels like at some point the FIA is going to have to weigh in on that. It can't just let that go for forever and then, potentially have something dangerous happen on track. But then there's also those little ticky-tack things like you talked about, Lewis going over the white line, and then occasionally we'll get speeding in the pit lane when they're going 51 miles an hour instead of 50 miles an hour. And it's it's not that big of a difference, but I get that, Formula One is a game of these inches, not to quote football here, but it is a game of these sort of like little minute things. And if you leave any sort of wiggle room, then teams are going to take advantage of it, like we're seeing Max do right now with this this weird little maneuver thing that he's developed. So I definitely think that they need to develop some level of consistency. It seems like a difficult thing to do when you're going from country to country and you're recruiting, stewards from all over the place and things like that. So I understand the difficulties there, but it is definitely frustrating as a fan to, we're so used to US sports where the rules are seemingly consistent across the board. And, you can argue whether someone like Scott Foster is interpreting the rules in the same way in the NBA and whatever you want. But generally things are the same. And in Formula One, they're often not the same. So it's frustrating to follow at times and not always feel like I know what the outcome of a ruling is going to be.
Yeah, I never know what the hell's going on. I feel like F1's having, it's like, is this a catch situation? It's like, is this moving under braking? It depends. We need to watch 17 more angles of it. But yeah, I think the other thing is like the severity of the punishments that are doled out, or the penalties that are doled out. It's like, so going over the line coming out of the pit lane is 5 seconds. Max gets double that for what seems like a way more dangerous move.
Right.
Multiple moves also, but he just gets this 1 10-second penalty when he's 20 seconds ahead of the next car behind him. So really it doesn't get any sort of punishment at all. And then there's like the occasional F1 race where it ends and then 10 hours later it's like, psych, this guy broke the rules and now Carlos wins. And it's like, okay, hold on a second.
That was the most incredible thing in Austria last year during qualifying, where it was like qualifying was over and all of a sudden it was like, oh, actually this lap got deleted because we didn't catch it at first. But now 30 minutes later, we find out that he went over the white line. It's so chaotic.
Yes, and it feels like it never ends. And every year they're like, well, remember last year we did this, now we're going to do it differently. And it's more confusing. So I, as like a newer fan, I've been watching F1 for like 4 years now. I still am sort of at a loss of what is cool and isn't cool. And then if you talk to anyone like Spanners who's been watching in previous decades, who's been on the show before, you find out that like what I became accustomed to in 2021 actually is a very new thing in F1 and not the way that cars used to race. So I'm still playing catch up on all that. And I think it's fun to continually have this debate. But I do wonder if there is like a level of frustration that newer fans find that they just don't really know what's going on and don't think they'll ever be able to figure it out, because even older fans are confused now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at a state where I'm with you. I'm a relatively new F1 fan too, and so I feel like I've finally gotten to a place where I should understand the rules and should know what's going on. And then there are nights where like I watched the US soccer game last night and I was like, do I just not understand what offsides is anymore? Like have I been lied to this whole time? That was just the worst
referee in the history of Copa America. Like that was truly baffling. I wonder if you could correlate George's win on Sunday and England winning their game to Logan Sargent's F1 season and our U.S. men's national team. Like if there's any sort of correlation there.
There's a good metaphor there, and I'm not sure I'm the person to make it, but I think you're onto something. Just abysmal performances all around. But yeah, like there are moments in F1 battles where, it's sort of the same thing with like, how far alongside of a car do you have to be before you get a right of way and all of this stuff, where there are weeks where I feel like, okay, I have a good grasp on this. And then the next week I feel like they rule something completely different. And I realize, it's all relative. And none of these rules are written in stone. And I don't actually understand what's going on. So it's a great sport. So fun to be a fan of.
That's why it's fun to do a podcast and be able to just break it all down and commiserate and find other people that are also confused. So well, Meg, thank you for joining. This was a blast. We will definitely need to have you on again, maybe when Spencer's back from his trip. Again, no idea what he's doing. I saw this.
I'm so curious. I'm so curious about this whole Mongolia thing.
I am as well. I saw this TikTok a few weeks ago about these rare Mongolian horses that kept cropping up all over the U.S. I don't know if you're like a horse girl, but I'm not. And I went down a deep rabbit hole. They're called like Przewalski's horses, but it's spelled like you wouldn't spell it. And I wonder if Spencer is like on the hunt for these missing horses, but maybe not. I don't know. That's the only thing I can think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I will be incredibly curious to hear why he is in Mongolia. But yeah, grateful that, his absence allowed me to come on. This is very fun.
I highly recommend that rabbit hole if you have time. Thanks for joining. We will be back next week after Silverstone with another guest co-host. It should be a fun time. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, subscribe, follow, tweet at us, tweet questions at us. We love doing mailbag episodes and mailbag stuff. So thank you again, Meg. See you next time you're on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.